Boy.
Hi, Vanessa. Sorry about the glitch with the Zoom link, but I'm so glad you're able to join us and it worked out. Yeah.
You might be on mute. Oh, no, there you are. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was starting to panic, but then you invited me, but thank you. How are you doing?
Good. We do have attendees joining us too, just so you know, but I'll let us get settled and we'll start in a couple of minutes. So sorry about that. I don't know how the panel link did send. I'm really sorry.
And do I have, yes, I can. So it's okay. I can share my PowerPoint.
Great.
I'm going to share my screen now too for the PowerPoint. 1 second.
It's funny that Zoom can still be that messed up to deal with. All these years in, right?
I know.
All right. Vanessa, do you have any questions about anything?
I think I'm good. Are you good?
I think I'm good. I assume we're kind of going to play off each other for some of it, so that'll be good.
Yes.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today, and thanks so much for your patience. As you noted, we were just laughing, it's 2 years in, and no matter how much you prep, there's always some little things that happen with Zoom, but so glad for you all to be here today. My name's Alana Dawn. I am the Sustainability Partnerships and Events Coordinator here at U Calgary, and I am so honored to have Dr. Vanessa Andreotti here with us as part of the Climate Conversation Speaker Series. I feel really grateful I get to learn from Dr. Vanessa Andreotti and Dr. Melanie Klotzel today to learn more about the Climate and Nature Emergency Catalyst Program and how educational institutions can be real catalysts for change. So I'd like to start in a good way. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nation. The city of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, District 5 and 6. Acknowledging the land is a really part of Truth and Reconciliation to honor Indigenous cultural practices and help build respectful relationships. We honor that truth and reconciliation is an important part of advancing climate and social justice and name colonialism as a root cause for climate change. We are grateful for Indigenous communities for their leadership in climate action and protecting the health of the land and sharing their knowledges for building healthy relationships amongst communities and the earth. Before we continue, I also wanted to normalize and validate that discussions around climate change, biodiversity loss, and oppression can bring up heavy emotions such as grief, loss, pain, or anxiety. And we honor any heavy emotions people are bringing to this conversation today. At the end, I do have a list of resources for anyone seeking any climate grief or general wellness supports. So now I'm going to share a little bit more about the Climate Conversation Speaker Series. The U Calgary Climate Conversation Speaker Series aspires to engage the campus community and Albertans and beyond in transformative conversations on climate action. The purpose is to learn and share from diverse perspectives and worldviews on climate change, and to really encourage participants to take meaningful action and connect with the climate action community. So our agenda for today, we're going to get to hear from the brilliant Vanessa Andreotti, and then Melanie and Vanessa will engage with the discussion. Melanie was a participant of the Climate and Nature Emergency Catalyst Program. And then we're going to move into a Q&A with everyone. And just to note, you've probably noticed this is a webinar format, so it's not like a meeting. You don't have access to chat. You do have access to the Q&A function. There's the emotions button you can press too. I love when people share hearts and thumbs up when people are speaking. What else did I want to say about this? Oh yes, when we get to the Q&A, we are going to use a fun new platform called Slido. It's really engaging and allows people to upvote each other's questions so that Vanessa and Melanie can answer the questions that are most interested to people. But I will tell you more about how to use Slido and give a bit of a demo when we get to that part in the session. Now, I'm very thrilled to introduce Dr. Melanie Klotzel. She's not only moderating today, but she'll also be sharing her thoughts and perspectives and experiences in her work in art and climate justice. Dr. Melanie Klotzel is a settler performance maker, scholar, and educator based in Treaty 7 territory. She's the co-director of the dance theater company called Klotzel & Co. and co-director of the art intervention Collective Traction that produces the Climate Art Web. And I'll share that link in just a moment. Melanie has created films, events, workshops, and encounters that have been shared in theater spaces, alternative venues, spaces of public assembly, and online environments across 4 continents. She is a professor of dance at the University of Calgary. So a big heartfelt welcome, Melanie, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Alana Dawn. Just a note for those of you who have seen my name in print many times, as Alana Dawn has, it's actually pronounced Kletzel, rhymes with pretzel, just so you know.
Sorry, Melanie.
Yeah, no worries. I'm so pleased, obviously, that Dr. Vanessa Andreotti has agreed to join us for this webinar. I met Vanessa about 2 years ago, and I've been a huge fan ever since, and also just thrilled that I've been able to work with her in small amounts over the past year, actually. Just a couple notes. Vanessa has just moved, Dr. Andreotti has just moved to be the Dean of the Faculty of Education at University of Victoria. She was a Canada Research Chair at UBC for many years. She works a lot in the areas of global citizenship education and, of course, touches on so many ideas, including issues of decolonization, modernity, and the climate and nature emergency. She also is the co-founder, as it says, of Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures, which is a fantastic collective that it joins artists and scholars to really think about what is going to happen in terms of modernity and its demise and how we might think about what new kinds of futures we could have. So I'm going to pass it off to Dr. Andreotti, and she will take us on an adventure, I know, today, as she always does. And then at the end, we will have a conversation a little bit about the Catalyst program and my participation in that Catalyst program, as well as then we'll open the floor for Q&A afterwards. So I'm going to pass it to Vanessa.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Melanie and Alana Dawn. Thank you for the invitation. I will start by acknowledging the land as a living entity, not as a property or as a resource, as something we are part of, and that we need to greet and recognize that the violence inflicted on the land is also violence inflicted on our bodies, which are also land. So I would also like to acknowledge the ancestral custodians of the land where the University of Victoria is located, the Songhees and the Esquimalt, Lakwangan-speaking peoples, as well as the Husainich and other Lakwangan-speaking nations that have a special relationship with this land as well. And I would like to acknowledge my elders in Kainai, Keith and Karen Chiefmoon. I came to Canada married into a Cree and Blackfoot family, and my education, as I said, I first set foot on this land, was the responsibility of Keith and Karen. So I'm extremely grateful for their work and the lessons they've taught me and this connection with Kainai. I think that because I come from a mixed heritage background, sometimes the acknowledgements come and you don't even know where they're coming from. But I need to acknowledge also that we're here with our ancestors, not only those who have come before us, but also those yet to come. And there's a huge responsibility in relationship to both sides, to ancestors who have come before. We're responsible for honoring their work, but also correcting their mistakes. And the ancestors yet to come, of course, we are responsible for the viability of life and the legacy we are leaving them in terms of the harms that that we have, that we're also responsible for. So the last acknowledgement I would like to make, apart from the acknowledgement of all the violence that is taking place and all the suffering that is going on in the world now that make it possible for us to be protected in this bubble that is the global north and that allows us to be here today, is the fact that in all of that, we are still a family. And this family right now, including human and non-human beings, is in disease. And what is needed right now is for us to find the wisdom to repair relations so that we can figure out what to do at the time of endings and where our existence is at risk and the continuity of life is at risk. So I would like to start the session with that and then talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So I'll actually share my screen already. Where is it? Here. And I will put also on the chat the link to the report. So we're going to be talking about a program called Moving with Storms, which was a program at the University of British Columbia at the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies. And this was a catalyst program that was that was carried out in the last year of the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies. So I became director as the institute was closing and because of the funding had moved somewhere else. And we had one year where I just had to do what the institute had already always done for 30 years, which was to support a cohort of only 12 academics in an interdisciplinary program where they would be released from academic responsibilities, most academic responsibilities, to be able to be together over a year in lunches, trying to address issues of concern, but trying to foster this interdisciplinary dialogue. And the Institute had done that for 30 years. And it was time, actually, from my perspective, for the Institute to change. But the funders decided that they wanted to fund research grants rather than the Institute. So it was only in the last year of the Institute, when we were actually going to turn off the lights, that we had, as a director and my team, as a team of a leadership team, and I need to acknowledge today that we also have one of the other people in the leadership team here as one of the participants, Dr. Sharon Stein. And it was only in this last year that we had the freedom to change this model. And because it was the last year, right? So we were not, we were relatively unburdened by the history, this 30 years of history and the past. We actually could set our energy, or invest our energy on what we believed could be the future. So this program is our attempt it was our attempt to show what could be done differently in climate initiatives in universities if we had the freedom to do whatever we wanted to do. So that is the attempt of a group of people. I didn't do it alone. There was a leadership team of six people. But what we did the first thing we did was to expand and distribute these funds that were available. We had 2.5 million available for a year. So instead of investing only in 12 people, we spread these funds to 70 people, and there were 6 cohorts. One cohort of undergrad students, one cohort of grad students, one cohort of artists, one cohort of academics, one cohort of emeriti, which are people who, academics who are retired, and then one cohort also of staff at the university working in related areas. So that was the first thing we did. We expanded the program, redistributed the funds, and then we created a number of different initiatives and experiments that I'm going to talk about today, about some of them. So here are 10 things we did that we believed are different from what normally happens in initiatives like that. So the first one was that we grounded the program, because the program had these resources, right? So we had to distribute these funds, and there were funding calls. And the funding calls then were based, and the programmatic area was also based on 4 guiding principles. And these guiding principles were grounded on intellectual and relational rigor. Generally in academia, we only think about intellectual rigor, and this time we wanted these principles to be grounded on relational rigor, which is related to our responsibilities and accountabilities to each other and to the land. The second one was collaborative multidisciplinary leadership structure. So I was not doing this on my own. We wanted a distributed leadership structure, and we also wanted leadership that was in the background rather than in the foreground. So we wanted to be able to create a context where people would be organically self-organizing, but with a lot of support, so that we could ground the work in these guiding principles, but also have a compass for the directions that we would like to encourage people to go. As I said before, number 3 is multiple cohorts. There were multiple cohorts, so both scholars, undergraduate, graduate students, emeriti, artists, and staff. One of the priorities of the program was to support and amplify Indigenous critiques, voices, and aspirations. We had funding for cohort, for cross-sectoral and community collaborations. We also tried to create a program that was grounded on this idea of a critically engaged and complexity-informed educational inquiry, which is what we understand climate education to be about. And in order to do that, we needed to approach the climate and nature emergency as a wicked challenge. We also had artistic immersion sessions for processing climate grief and building climate resilience. We had monthly connection lunches where everybody, or most people, managed to be in the same place, and then each cohort would host one of the lunches. We had UBC and external partnerships, and we also had funding for critical interventions in global events, so like COP27 and events of the European Commission. So and this was very important because this funding was used to support a delegation of Indigenous people from the Amazon, the Hunikui people, that was led by Chief Ninawa Hunikui, so that the forest, the Amazon forest, could have a voice at COP27. And we managed also to do some of that through different funding streams for 2028 to support Chief Ninawa there, together with the Indigenous Environmental Network. So the last thing I want to say about the overview of the program is that we chose the title Climate and Nature Emergency, not emergencies, to underscore the fact that the climate is not separate from nature. And we are not separate from nature, right? So climate and nature are one thing. That's why it's one emergency. And one thing that became very clear for us is that while we can adapt to climate change, we cannot adapt to biodiversity catastrophe, or the UN calls it the biodiversity apocalypse. So if we don't put these things together, we may have the false impression that adaptation is going to solve all the problems, but when we put them together, we see that it's much more complex than that, and it will require from us much more in the sense of restraining in terms of what we're doing to the planet than just thinking about the problem of climate, right? So today we're going to be talking about number 1, which is the 4 guiding principles, the idea of support and amplify Indigenous critiques, but I'll do that at the end. And I'll focus more on the critically engaged and complexity-informed educational inquiry part. And then Melanie is going to talk more about the artistic immersion sessions in the artistic cohort through talking about her experience in the program. So we'll start with the guiding principles. So there, as I said before, there were 4 guiding principles. The first one was ethical collaborations, and these were used for both funding calls. So participants who applied for funding, they had to describe how they were addressing or responding to these principles in the call. So the first one is ethical collaborations, transdisciplinary, intergenerational, community relationship building, grounded on trust, respect, reciprocity, consent, and accountability. Number 2 was intellectual depth. We asked participants to be self-critical and exercise the self-reflexivity and relational rigor in moving beyond common patterns of simplistic solutions, paternalistic forms of engagements, and ethnocentric ideals of sustainability, justice, and change. Number 3 was reparative redistribution. So we were trying to allocate resources and inviting people to allocate resources in their projects, prioritizing populations that were most affected by the CNE and by precarity, and research areas of greatest urgency and impact guided by principles of reparation. And number 4, it was engagement with the Indigenous Strategic Plan of UBC. So deepening our understanding of the responsibilities of settlers and supporting the aspirations of Indigenous scholars and communities. So what we found out about the application of these principles and what we've learned in the process of people trying to address these issues was that the lessons learned. That ethical collaborations, of course, are very difficult and they take a long time. So thinking about it within a year, we've had lots of people wanting to start collaborations, and of course they couldn't talk about how they were already doing this respect for relationships grounded on trust, respect, reciprocity, consent, and accountability. But they also show that probably they didn't know what it would take and what it would and how long it would take and what it would mean for them to do that, because our university systems are based on transactional relationships and that are grounded on outcomes, right, rather than real engagement and collaboration that is about walking together in a path where things are emergent. So we found out that ethical collaborations were very difficult. Intellectual depth, it's not yet common sense that we need this self-critique. So a lot of people wanted to go and solve problems without really seeing or being able to acknowledge how they are also part of the problem. Number 3, the reparative distribution was also something that is not usually talked about in academia, and there are pushbacks even to talking about that, to seeing the land as stolen land, to seeing ourselves as indebted to Indigenous communities. So all these pushbacks also came and surfaced in the program. And number 4, which is engagement with the strategic plan, in a way, people wanted to do that as a checklist, but the depth of engagement with the strategic plan requires flexibility, commitment, and also resources. It cannot be done as a checklist. So this was one of the first lessons that emerged as we were reflecting on the year. And throughout these presentations, I'm going to be talking about it like that, like what we've learned, what we've tried, and what we've learned. So in terms of climate education, we wanted to create a context of critically engaged, complexity-informed, contextually relevant, and socially and ecologically accountable regenerative inquiry. And what is regenerative inquiry? So we were defining regenerative inquiry as an invitation for people to approach the issue as collaborative inquiry and suspend the impulse to solve and to fix. And we talked about this 55/5 rule, which apparently comes from Einstein, who said that if you have an hour and the problem in front of you, you should spend 55 minutes on the problem and 5 minutes on the solution, not the other way around. And what we find generally, because we are conditioned to do that by education, is that people want to go straight to how do we solve this without even understanding what the problem is. In regenerative inquiry, we also talk about this we invite people to collectively engage with the issue, seeking to identify multiple angles, multiple layers, interconnections, and hotspots, and to expand their capacity to stay with the tensions and the difficulties and the pain of the issue, rather than feeling overwhelmed, immobilized, or rushing to quick fixes, or to be or wanting to be rescued from the discomfort. So we invite them to embrace ambiguity, uncertainty, paradoxes, and contradictions, to identify and collaboratively articulate questions that are worth holding collectively, and to seek collective epiphanies rather than certainties or consensus. So this requires a different chemistry of learning and unlearning and of collaboration. So instead of it being dopamine focused, like let's just get it done and get that dopamine hit, we were moving metaphorically towards acetylcholine, which is more about being grounded and having the stamina and resilience to stay with it in the long haul, while we, in this collaboration, while we create the conditions for a chain of collective epiphanies. And the high you get out of that is not, it's a very different high from the high of dopamine. You know, that high that when you're taught something you're not expecting to be taught, for that to happen, you need to be paying attention to, paying broader attention to something rather than just to achieving a goal, right? That speaks to something inside of us that is hungry for fulfillment, right? And that dopamine fix doesn't really address that emptiness, the need of fulfillment, whereas this other way of learning does, and it creates much more resilience for us not to be giving up in the face of failure or adversity or mistakes, right? So this is different. This kind of engagement with the issue is different from asserting or seeking validation for one's opinion, fixing or solving a problem, or offering advice, or seeking consensus. Another way that we talk about it today is to do with, there's a we use a metaphor related to the evolution of computers, right? So or computing. So we have this idea of analog, digital, and quantum. So if we translate it into reasoning, analog reasoning would be it's a narrow form of intelligence, right? And intelligence, I'm borrowing here from Daniel Schmartenberger, that talks about intelligence as optimization towards a goal. And a very, very narrow form. So it's a single linear either or thing that it's more like we look at different layers of complexity. We collapse these layers into one layer only. We impose a narrative of coherence, and we defend the borders of this narrative, right? So that's, let's say that's analog thinking. Now, digital thinking is the possibility of seeing the other channels, the other layers, and being able to hold it, to hold more information, to see tensions and paradoxes and contradictions without falling apart and without freaking out. So here you're not afraid of uncertainties, you are not afraid of complexity, but yet you're still seeing things as separate things rather than focusing on interactions. So in quantum computing, you can process what's going on in a different way. So what we're referring to as quantum reasoning is this connection with the whole, understanding that you can't understand the whole, right? And you're part of the whole. So you connect both with the mystery, the materiality, and the movement of the whole rather than the form. So instead of focusing on form, you focus on movement. And I think Melanie and I will have a conversation about that later. But that shift of focus is super important. So moving from analog reasoning towards at least digital reasoning, and then gesturing towards what this metaphor of quantum reasoning, or this analogy of quantum computing into reasoning, is what this regenerative inquiry is trying to do. So we were trying to create context where we could do that in the program. And we tried lots of different things, because for regenerative inquiry to work, you need a stimulus, right? So I'm going to be talking about the different kinds of stimulus we used in the program. So we used quite a lot of multimodal experiments. So there were multiple intellectual, embodied, and artistic experiments, which included next practices. So instead of best practices, we were looking for next practices. And I'm going to show you an example of that in the Vermont Sterling College mission and vision. Then we had exercises in systems and complexity and theories, and then relational sciences and technologies guided by Indigenous people from the Amazon. We also developed a set of invitations called 7 Steps Back and 7 Steps Forward, and we're going to talk about that too. And then we had the Facing Human Wrongs course, which is going to be the last thing I'm going to talk about. So if we look at next practices, so we were looking at examples of universities doing things that were really out there and that could help us set our imagination outside of the familiar. So Vermont Sterling College is the first liberal college in the US that has set a different mission and vision in response to the climate and nature emergency. So they reconstructed it to say that higher education is part of the problem, and that by recognizing that, they would be able to do something different. So they say that Sterling uses education as a force to address critical ecological problems caused by unlimited growth and consumption that is destroying the planet as we have known it, such as fossil fuel dependence and rapid climate change, destruction of biodiversity and loss of wild spaces, promotion of harmful agricultural practices that threaten human and natural communities, persistence of structural oppression that impacts human and ecological well-being, and deterioration of civil society through estrangement from community, nature, and place. So we were looking for examples that could really get people to start thinking about it in different ways. Because generally when we say, okay, we need to acknowledge a problem in universities and the complicity of universities in creating the climate and nature emergency, people say, like, it's impossible. People are coming here to find a job in one of these areas that are creating a problem, or to find a green job in the solution. But if we acknowledge that they're part of the problem, we are immobilized by this. Well, we are not. Sterling College is, Vermont Sterling College is showing and leading the way in creating an understanding of the role of the university that is very different. So we would use this as stimulus for inquiry, for asking us to stretch our imagination into something else. But one thing we didn't do was to say that this is the only way, right? This is, we were trying to move away from moralizing approaches that tend to create a lot of backlash these days, and figuring out how to stay with the trouble and hold space for the complexity of the issue, but still being guided by a compass. And our compass was one where we were trying to invite people into emotional sobriety, relational maturity, intellectual discernment, and intergenerational responsibility, but without giving the answers. The other thing that we did was to really emphasize the fact that the climate and nature emergency is a super wicked challenge. So here is an explanation. Regular challenges are everyday problems with known solutions. Complicated challenges are problems that require specialized expertise. Wicked challenges and super wicked challenges are different. Wicked challenges are multi-layered, complex, and interlocked problems with no clear solution. They have larger timescales and are characterized by organized irresponsibility. Super wicked challenges are wicked urgent challenges, like wicked challenges on steroids, with a short window for action, where those who created the problems are also proposing solutions, and where irrational discounting keeps pushing responses into the future. So when we treat a super wicked challenge as a complicated or regular challenge, you get this. You get, for example, the carbon tunnel vision, where we focus on carbon as the only thing we need to focus. And if we solve the carbon problem, we're done, kind of thing, right? So this is not only analog thinking, but an approach to the problem that does not recognize the interconnectedness of all the other emergencies and crises that are putting ourselves at risk of premature extinction. This other cartoon also talks a little bit about that. So if we only look at the issue in a very narrow way, we really miss the point. Now, I also mentioned that we had the invitations of the 7 steps back and 7 steps forward or aside. And this became very important, actually. This is one of the things that landed towards the end of the program. So I'll go through the invitations and I'll talk a little bit about that later. So the first invitation is for us to step back from our own self-image, to decenter our ego and to center the challenge at hand. And there are some questions that go with that. We actually have it became a deck of cards for the questions. The second invitation is to step back from one's generational cohort to have a sense of how incoming generations may interpret and experience the challenges differently. Number 3 is stepping back from the universalization of one's social, cultural, economic parameters of normality to understand one's privilege as a loss of perspective and sensibility. Number 4 is stepping back from the immediate context and time to see the wider historical, structural, and systemic patterns that are affecting the local context. Number 5 is stepping back from normalized patterns of problem posing, problem solving, and relationship building to tap what is already viable but unimaginable or unintelligible in the mainstream. Number 6 is stepping back from the elevation of humanity above the rest of nature to consider our metabolic entanglement with everything in the planet. So in this case, we did use sometimes rights of nature or the when we make rivers into people so that they can have rights. What's the name of that? Yeah, I just lost the word. But we started to think about what would we do differently if we were liable to all the harm that we do that does not fit the current legal systems, right? The harm that we do to non-human beings and to rivers and trees and to the sea that doesn't fit our current human-centered legal systems. Then number 7 is stepping back from the impulse to find quick fixes in order to expand our capacity, not to be immobilized by complexity, complicity, and uncertainty. And then we invite people to take 7 steps forward or aside. The first is stepping back, forward or aside, not back this time, stepping forward or aside with honesty and courage to see what you don't want to see. Number 2, including your complicity and harm. Number 2 is stepping forward or aside with humility to find strength in openness and vulnerability. Number 3 is stepping forward or aside with self-reflexivity so that you can read how you're being read and learn to read the room. Number 4 is stepping forward or aside with self-discipline to do the work on yourself so that you don't become work for other people, especially Black, Indigenous, and people of color. 5, stepping forward or aside with maturity to do what is needed rather than only what you want to do. 6, stepping forward or aside with expanding discernment and attention, increasing care in proportion to risk. And 7, stepping forward or aside with adaptability, flexibility, stamina, and resilience for the long haul, and being prepared to fall, to fail, to have our plans shattered, to be stretched, to change course, and to find joy in the struggle itself, rather than the imagined prize at the end. So we had lots of questions that went with each of these invitations that then became a deck of cards called Towards Relational Accountability that we distributed during the program, and now people can buy it from the company that produces the card. You can order to print. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is the Facing Human Wrongs course. So Facing Human Wrongs is a 6-week course that originated at UBC, then went out of UBC into the world through Creative Commons, and then was used to raise funds for communities during the pandemic for Indigenous communities in the South, because these communities were the ones who inspired the design of the program, and they continue to support it. So as we are doing the course here in the Global North, the communities are doing ceremonies in the Global South for the people who are participating in the course. So it's a 6-week course, and it was created to expand our capacity, our collective capacity, to sit with difficult things and painful things without feeling immobilized, without feeling overwhelmed, and without wanting quick fixes and being and wanting to be rescued from discomfort of acknowledging our complicity and harm and the complexity of addressing these issues, the magnitude of the problem, so that we could show up to each other very differently. So at the heart of facing human wrongs is this inquiry that is here on the screen. So I invite people to think about this. What if you knew, in your skin, in your flesh and bones, what if we knew in our skin, flesh and bones, not just in the head, that major, wider social and ecological collapse is inevitably in the horizon, and that in 10 to 20 years or less, what is familiar today will no longer be viable? What if we could collectively respond today from a cultural space of emotional sobriety or serenity, relational maturity, intellectual discernment, and intergenerational responsibility? What would you or we be doing or advocating for then? And there's also the question about what would the people who are born today, 30 years from now, be grateful for things that we've done today, for actions we've done today? What would be the most responsible thing to do so that they have a better shot at staying alive? So I would like to conclude this presentation before we go to the conversation with Melanie, with 3 people who were key in this process, came to visit us, who guided us, mentored us too, and who are at the forefront, or frontline is a problematic term, but I can't find another one right now. The front line of the struggle against neocolonialism in climate change and climate change mitigation. So Chief Ninawahu Nikui from Acre in the Brazilian Amazon is a global advocate against the financialization of forests and carbon trading in the Amazon. Maria Yara Querar from Vale Sagrado in Peru is a community leader in protests against lithium mining in indigenous territories. And Matheus Tremembé in Ceará, Brazil, is a national leader against the offshore wind farms in indigenous waters and a food sovereignty advocate. So the fees that I'm receiving for this talk are going to go to an account that they can access for their work in their contexts. And we're very grateful for the work that they do on behalf of all of us. So I'm going to stop here and have a conversation with Melanie. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. There is, as always, so much to think about in what you offer us. I'm incredibly grateful, as you can see from everyone else who's sending up their hearts to you. So yeah, we were going to have a little bit of a conversation about perhaps my role within my experiences within the Catalyst program. Also, for those of you who don't know, right, so I am a dance professor, which means, the body is often a big part of my focus. And so I came to the program also from that perspective. I think I was invited into the program from that perspective, likely. And so that has been kind of a guiding principle as I've been communicating with this information and all this material. So Vanessa, do you want me to ask you a question, or do you want to ask me a question?
I think I'll start by asking you, how was it for you?
I kind of thought you might want to. Yeah, it was an amazing experience. Just to give people a little bit of a guideline for what I was, how I was participating. Vanessa asked if I would participate in the cohort, the artistic cohort, it was interesting for me too, because I am obviously a university professor and a scholar. So I was kind of going back and forth between two arenas from that perspective, while most of the folks, some of the others were in the same position, but most of them were artists, that they were not scholars. That was not like a major part of their work. And so I was coming at it kind of from that dual perspective. And the way it was set up was that we did the Facing Human Wrongs course with someone named Danny D'Amelia, who is a remarkable artist who is very well known in performing arts circles from their work with La Pace Nostra and other artists around the world. So Danny helped facilitate our session of the Facing Human Wrongs course, which went over kind of a 12-week time frame. And then the second part of the session, we worked on kind of developing immersive artistic exercises, basically, that we would kind of try out on one another. And then we came together for 1 week where we kind of continued that work and then facilitated one of these artist immersion sessions right at the end of that week together. Among having dinners together and meeting with Indigenous elders, and Vanessa and the rest of the Gesturing Towards Decolonial Futures people would come in, and we would have kind of interactions with them as well. So just to give you a framework of how the year went for us as the art cohort, the artist cohort. I will say this, the impact has been very, very profound on me and my work. I came across Vanessa's work through the Hospicing Modernity book while I was on sabbatical. And during sabbatical, I thought I was going to do some particular research, and within about a month, I'd completely changed to realize that I wasn't going to do any of that work until I'd started to do some really deep decolonization, which is why I discovered Vanessa's work in the first place. And so this kind of ongoing connection and interaction with the work has been so impactful on me. My own work has shifted towards thinking about what facilitation might mean, how we can engage people differently in the facilitated process so that it's less focused on the artist as genius presenter, which is kind of the main model that exists in my field, and art as capitalistic product, which is also the other thing that has happened within art communities. And I've grown, increasingly upset about that over my time. And so this work has really supported this kind of, I already had the idea that I was like, this is not right. And I was trying out some new ideas, but this work has really pushed me and said, oh yeah, this is the right direction. And so I think the other thing that I was just going to say, Vanessa, that as you were talking about this idea of staying with the trouble and not finding easy solutions, but also having a compass that helps guide you through that. And I think that has been one of the most enduring impacts on me, is that it feels like this is a compass that has been so well considered, and it jives with my own compass really, really effectively. So so I'll just say that to start with. I don't know if any of that makes you want to ask me another question, Vanessa, but.
So we talked in relationship to your field too. There was this conversation at some point where we talked about the move from form of the attention, right, and investment from form to movement. So this is a move in art too, like instead of the form and aesthetics, how do we tune in to the intimacy of movement and mystery? And what I mean by mystery is this investment in the knowledge of totality and certainty and control of the whole, to be with, right? To breathe with, to dance with whatever it is that is dancing with you, including language, including other people for sure, including non-human things, including the air that you breathe, including time, including space. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So So I think that part of, what that makes me also think about is this issue of relationality and how we dive into relationality through the body in a different way than what we might be used to in artistic process, for example, right? So it's true that artistic process has been so focused on aesthetics and form and product, right? And so how we start to shift that so that we can go back to focusing on the body as one of the prime points for relationality, right? And that we can relate to land and one another and, more than human species in a different way because we are intimately connected with them through our physicality, right? And this points to like what you brought up in the very beginning, that the violence inflicted on the land is violence inflicted on our bodies because our bodies are land, right? So that idea that actually we can start to recognize that our body is part of this planet in a completely different way than has typically been accessed, I think has been super impactful on me. But I will say that it's very difficult to figure out how to open a door that other people then feel like they are also allowed to experience that themselves, right? So some people obviously are very connected with the natural environment in a certain kind of way. They're used to hiking, they're used to, climbing, they're used to doing all kinds of other activities. But the reality is those are very few people a lot of times. And, they're also sometimes very privileged people within, especially in this kind of North American context, that are doing that. So how do we take it past that and say, okay, well, what does it mean for all of us to engage with our bodies as land in a different way, right? So I think that has been really helpful for me. I mean, my own research area is on site-specific performance, so I am really focused on how it is that the body ends up relating and connecting to the spaces around them anyway. So that's been a big focus of mine, but this gives me a different sense of how we think of participatory work, right? That is not just for artists. It's not just for dancers. Everybody has a body in all kinds of differently abled ways that those bodies can engage with place and the environment and the air and the land. And I think that has been really helpful for me, but it's so difficult sometimes to like bring other people to that space and to bring students who've been trained in ways that are often quite traumatic, actually, to those spaces. So that also gets to the educational piece a little bit. But anyway, I'll leave that there if you want to jump in again.
No, maybe we should, like, education, I think, is key here, right? And principles of education that allow for different movements. So going back to that idea of the analog and intelligence that I was talking about. So back to Schmachtenberger's idea of we in Western societies, we are conditioned or hardwired to operate in this very narrow form of intelligence. And then on the other hand, here we're thinking about the quantum and the whole and the mystery and the movement, that there's this broad wisdom, right? That this narrow intelligence cannot access. So education is maybe about the bridge here, right? Yep. From the narrow intelligence to the broad wisdom, and understanding that this narrow intelligence is actually part of broad wisdom if it is connected and challenged by what's going on in here, right? There's gift here too. It's not just disease. Disease is just universalizing this narrowness. But that universalization is what the university does. Yeah. Right? The university universalizes a very narrow relationship with everything, like with accountability, with progress, with development. Everything is very narrow. And this narrowness is creating catastrophic existential crisis for us and very real dangers for humanity, right? So figuring out how to get back to the body, basically, but not to the body as form, to the body as movement. And the same happens with our understandings of identity. And one of the things that Chief Ninawa has taught us is that having our identity grounded in human constructs of community and belonging. It's still important because there are layers where we need those things for intelligibility, and we need to confront a lot of violence that has gone in there too. So we can't let go of this. But there is another way to ground our identity in the umbilical cord we have with the core of the earth, where we actually feel what the earth is going through, and we as part of the earth are going through, and we can allow that to become a channel of the biointelligence or the bio-wisdom of the earth to guide and design who we need to be at this point in time. And that is a difficult invitation, because that is also painful, right? So I'm thinking about the body as a painful site.
Yeah.
It's easier to be numbed. It's easier to consume as a way of numbing also, or to ground the identity in the body in form or fixed forms of identity grounded on narrow human constructs, as a way to avoid the materiality of the body, and also the fact that we're going to die, right? That this body is gonna have to return to shape shift into soil, into different kind of land. So I don't know, maybe, so how is death present in your work, and how does it show up?
Yeah, I will say two things. I will answer that in two ways. From the educational perspective, I think we are right now going through this, very large curriculum review, and it actually has allowed for some transformations that are, we're just at the beginning stages, but to realize that the way that this kind of universalizing education that has existed thus far is not working to address the problems, right? And so from that perspective, starting to rethink, oh, there are many forms, many indigenous forms from Africa, from North America, from all these different places around the planet that embrace that mystery, that understand the mystery, that understand that there's a larger intelligence at work that you're connecting to through the physical material dancing body. So I think that there has been a fundamental effort within kind of Western European Eurocentric forms to deny that for years, right? For centuries, there's been an effort to deny that and to dismiss it as amateurish, like, oh, if you're mimicking an animal, isn't that ridiculous? That's what you would do in a preschool class, for example, right? That kind of dialogue, when actually like that has been such a incredible dismissal of forms that actually do that and embrace and actually attempt to embody their non-human relations with love and empathy. So that dismissal is something that I'm trying to really think about. Oh my gosh, how do we address this in this program that has completely bought into a Eurocentric model, right? So there's that piece of things, which is from the education perspective. As an artist, right, it's fascinating because right now I happen to be in this very large production process that is an immersive production where the effort is to kind of disorient and destabilize a group of people, like through this kind of participation work that they do that is it's clearly consumerist, capitalist, focusing on kind of travel and how travel integrates with these larger kind of capitalist destruction of the planet. But then to purposely kind of disorient and destabilize in order to open someone up to look at this incredible Indigenous woman dancing and offering this healing dance with the land. And it's been an amazing process, but the resistance, the real, like, I don't know what to do with the uncertainty that I'm left in, the like real disinterest in engaging in any kind of way with the content around climate. There's so much interesting response, as well as of people who, of course, are like crying and healing and all of those kinds of things. So the width of reaction has been intense already. And so that thing of like how we work with other people, right, in a participatory way, and, you know, where our responsibility lies in that moment as artists in terms of facilitating that, as well as how an audience engages with it. It's fascinating. It's been fascinating. So, yeah.
And just to your point about the responses, from a narrow intelligence point of view, wisdom seems like stupidity.
Fascinating, right?
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Should we call Alana back? Alana Dawn
yeah,
back?
I assume so. I think at this point, Elena Dawn might walk folks a little bit through Slido in terms of having questions, and that Vanessa can answer. Do you want to say?
Vanessa, you too. This is
Okay, or both of us.
Yeah, I think you both will get questions, and I think I'm gonna default to using the Q&A in Zoom. We already have some questions coming in, and I'm just worried it might take people a little while to learn Slido, and then they'll lose out on getting to talk with you. So I hope that's okay.
no problem.
That's okay. Okay. So we have a first question here. What is your advice on guiding a friend through the process of abandoning the 4 denials?
I'm seeing the question and seeing the rest of it too.
Yeah.
Accompanying a person in the process means that we need to be able to hold space. And this holding space sometimes require holding a vomit bucket so that the person can also process what's in there, and then taking the vomit bucket to the land and putting the vomit in a safe place where it can be composted too. And being in a relationship of unconditional regard to the person, right? So, but at the same time, it would be important if we're going to if we're thinking about addressing denials, the first most important thing is to have the consent of the person, right? The person needs to be invested in the process. When we're addressing denials, which is different from addressing ignorance. So if you address ignorance, if you put information in front of a person and the ignorance is addressed. If you are trying to address a denial, you put the information in front of a person and you get shot because the defenses of the ego get they get activated, right? So if you're accompanying a person, is it the person's process already? The person has given consent for those denials to be addressed, and then it is supporting this person to figure out their own complexity, right? And in that case, we have this methodology called the bus within us that we use in the course, in the Facing Human Wrongs course, that invites you to see yourself as a bus of people. And to start to hold space for that complexity is absolutely necessary if you want to hold space for the complexity outside of you, and then to disinvest in the certainty and control that we have been hardwired to seek, right? So as you start to see the different passengers on your bus having a conversation, and start to think about where are they coming from, how old are they, and then you discover other decks of the bus where your ancestors are, where other species are also there with you, where the rest of humanity is there. I think that is the way to go from the narrow to the broad, both around you and within you, and then figuring out in this process how these denials have impaired your capacity for relationships and relationality. And even the way we understand relationships is very narrow. The way we've been, what we can imagine as a relationship is very narrow, and generally informed by this +1 or -1, right? Everything is calculated and transactional. So I either agree or disagree. I can't just be with and present, and it doesn't matter if I agree or disagree. So disinvesting in all these different layers of conditionings that we've had is both an individual process that requires a certain investment and energy and solitude so that you can sit with your bus, right? And a collective process. but this collective process cannot be a coercive one, and it cannot be a transactional one, and it cannot be one where like one person is trying to run ahead of the and pull the other with them, right? So it's a negotiation that is very delicate, and it requires a lot of intimacy. And it also, I think the last thing I would say, and I know that I'm kind of, it sounds like a ramble, but it isn't, because it's coming from like lots of lived experience about what's necessary. I think that if I had to give one sentence as an answer to that question, would be what's necessary is to have affinity of inquiry, not similarity of identity or even agreements on anything else. It is affinity of inquiry. And then we all have these questions we have to sit with. They are heavy questions, and it helps if we have somebody to share the weight. However, it's very, very tempting to have somebody else as a distraction from the real work too, and to escape the work of holding the question by having a conversation where you have your opinions affirmed or negated, right? So that's the mode of conversations that we have about opinions and validations and all of that. Yeah, that doesn't help, basically, right? But affinity of inquiry means that we are committed and accountable to the learning and the experiments and the failures and the successes and the mistakes that we make in trying to understand something in more depth, but not with our heads, with our bodies. So this understanding is experiential and experimental. So we decide to go together on a dance, and this dance is an improvising dance, guided by a compass of maybe intergenerational responsibility. Okay.
Can I just add quickly too, that I think that these kind of denials, like this is actually one of the things that I appreciate about Vanessa, is that she also understands the role of artistic experimentation because it affects like our emotions. And so it might be that in terms of dealing with the denials, having some kind of artistic experience with that person might actually really support kind of delving into those denials and helping that person kind of see them, right, in a different way. So anyway.
Yeah, thank you both so much. I was just learning, like, in those conversations, not approaching it like that quick fix, like, oh, I need to get this person to understand, which is that analog thinking you were sharing about. So so much depth in your answers, and I'm trying to take notes and listen. It's just really amazing. So I really appreciate it. The next question we have here is, what are your thoughts on decolonizing the global economic capital and building economic thresholds or limits?
Where is it?
It's a little bit down further.
Keel shot. One of the purple ones.
Yeah. Purple ones. Yeah. Okay, what are your thoughts on decolonizing the global economic capital and building economic thresholds or limits? Okay, let's start from any form of growth-based economy in a finite planet is self-terminating at some point, right? So figuring out, but at the same time, figuring out how, like stopping this right now creates more harm than, or abruptly, right, can create more harm than phasing it out or gradually, but we don't know if we have the time to phase it out either, because if we might have passed the tipping points. So figuring out other forms of economic, if we're thinking about economic, is how do we exchange things, right? Relations requires a much deeper understanding of the relationships themselves. So I think that like greening capitalism or and looking at degrowth, donut economics, or regenerative economies, it's still important because it's through experimentation, failed experimentations, that we will figure something else out. But also paying attention to in climate in the climate sphere, how a lot of people are trying to make profit out of the crisis itself, right? So financializing nature is one way that Chief Minowa talks about that does that. So we put a price on everything, and suddenly the air that we breathe has a price tag too. And then we are investing in carbon trading is another example that we are investing in keeping the carbon sink so that business can go on as usual, right? Actually, the Hunikuy people have this framework called climate fraud that talks, each one of the letters talks about false solutions to the climate crisis, and the F in fraud is financialization of nature. So an inquiry on a regenerative inquiry on economic problems or challenges and the possibility of new forms of economy is extremely important. And we need a different container for that inquiry too, because if we are going to be focusing on a profit-based economy in a context where we have exhausted surplus, we're already it won't work basically, right? So important question. We need a different way to approach it, and we need to be very careful and vigilant about how the system reproduces itself as it's saying that it's changing, right? Melanie.
Yeah, I'm gonna let you stay with that one. I mean, I could go on about, yes, the need for like thinking about something other than growth. There's no question about that. I mean, it is interesting because to some degree, this focus on, oh, the only way we can solve this is to look at, other models of economics and But, if we don't think about where the human is within that, right? Where the human body is within that, where that kind of material connection to the planet is within that conversation, it's, we're going to have another quick fix that is obviously not going to solve anything. So, yeah, I'll just add that.
Thank you both. There's a comment here for you, Melanie, that someone took one of your classes as a non-dance major and it introduced them to the concept of embodied experience and said it was such an important part of their education.
That's lovely. Thank you, Adriana.
We have another question on how do we go about connecting with, feel, and reflecting on the violence felt by the earth?
What color?
It's also purple.
It's at the very top. I'm going by order now, so to make it easier.
I can find it. Melanie, can you start, and then I will find it.
Yeah. I mean, this is actually a really interesting problem, right? So how do we, I mean, there's the connecting with, right? The reality is we are actually always connecting with that violence. We're just not recognizing that we're connecting with that violence, that it's being inflicted on us at all times, right? So the first thing is, how do we open our systems in a different way so that we actually feel that kind of violence that might be happening? It can be traumatizing though, obviously, right? So, and what's interesting is I'm in a place right now where there's a ton of students that come into our program who are coming with real trauma written into their bodies, partly because they've been part of a system that is focused on capitalism and competition as the only means of expression through the body. And so actually the violence is being quite literally scripted into their bodies all the time, right? That's how they experience the dancing body, is through these particular scripts around competitive dance, which is, inherently linked to also capitalist networks. So it's really interesting to see that those traumas, they build up over time, and then what do we do with them when they come to us, right? So they're actually connecting with that level of violence all the time, and they think that that is what dance is. So it's a really challenging issue when you know that other ways of connecting to the earth through the dancing body are so wonderfully healing and not obviously not in that arena of damage that we're talking about. So that is a challenge that, I mean, I've just started to really understand and recognize what I've been witnessing over the past couple of years in terms of that, that those are the students that are coming. And so trying to figure out, oh, okay, what does that mean? They're clearly traumatized. They clearly understand the violence, right? Because it's actually really, it's written into their own bodies a lot of times. So what do we do about opening up in a different way so that they can understand kind of these somatic experiences of their bodies from this like feeling perspective, that they're allowed not to fit into a very rigid mold, that there's so much else that the body has in terms of capacity for demonstrating not only what is internal, but also what is actually internal and connected to something else. Right. And I think that's the that's a challenge. And I mean, I'm a settler woman, right? I don't have this access that I now have, many more Indigenous colleagues and friends who have shared so much with me. And it's been so eye-opening for me in terms of understanding that there's other ways of doing this that are way outside of any of these kind of Western forms that we've been trained in. And and also understanding that I don't want to appropriate in any way. And I'm really cognizant of Western artistic forms doing that for so long, right? So trying to figure out ways of creating relationship that allow you to connect in really respectful ways is very challenging, but so much where the work needs to be done, in my opinion. So yeah, I'll say that. I don't know. Yeah, you can add to that, Vanessa.
I think the only thing I want to add is in terms of inquiry, one thing I've been thinking about, it's one way of thinking about it too. It's so the analog thinking of the bubble of stability we had after the wars, the Second World War, right? Especially for certain populations in the global South. And then that is our notion of progress, development, and so on and so forth, right? That bubble, that analog bubble, actually protects you from sensing all this pain, right? It creates the denials, it protects you from sensing. Now, this bubble has been burst by technology already 30 years ago. And the children being born in this period, both Gen A's, Gen Z's, millennials even, they don't have the analog. They can't go back to the analog. It's selective. They do go back there, but they have this diffractive experience of reality mainly through technology, where you have the complexity as a mode of interaction, whether you acknowledge it consciously or not, or whether you're taught in school to acknowledge that, right? So you have this diffractive experience. And in this diffractive experience, you have less protection against feeling all this pain. And at the same time, you have no wisdom, tradition, or compass at all to process the pain. And that's where people fall through the cracks, right? That's where you see anxiety, depression, self-harm going off the roof, because people are left with the bareness of a few things mediated through technology that filters and not a few things. But you feel in ways that you've never felt or other generations haven't felt before. And you don't have the means to process it, because all the other things that were all the other technologies of processing emotions and thoughts and relationships that existed before the analog have been rendered stupid or backward, or right. So the body has been rendered something even obsolete in this frame. So I'm really, really worried if we're thinking about Western societies as stuck in the self-infantilization mode, in this adolescence with a machine gun, right? And this machine gun is going to be used both towards everybody else on the planet, but it can also be used for self-harm. And people are looking for numbing, which means that they are feeling more of the pain, right? So our opioid crisis is a crisis of pain relief. People are looking for pain relief. And what I've been hearing, even in my family, is that I've heard another day that if I can't, it was something like, there's no point in being alive at this time because everything beautiful is being killed. So if I am alive, the time I have left, I need to have pleasure. Because if I don't, there's no point in being alive, right? And this was a 14-year-old. Dangerous, right? That a culture that doesn't produce grown-ups cannot support their children in going through in becoming elders. And I think that's one of the things we're facing. I'm sorry it was not a direct answer to the question, but I think it's to do with the eldership framework that we've lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you both. Vanessa, I'm going to put this next question in the chat, just so it's easier, and I'll also read it too. It's for both Vanessa and Melanie. So amazing presentation and touching words to both of you. Could you please share advice on how to develop decolonial ways to engage relationships between scholars in the North and Indigenous and Campesino communities in the South?
Okay, I could start. So what we've been told, and even not only with scholars in Campesinos communities, but Indigenous communities here too, the first thing we need to do is de-arrogantize and intentionally shed the arrogance that comes with academia, right? So if we're going to be doing academic community partnerships, we need to understand we don't understand and be ready to be taught, which is different from learning from. So there's this, I think it actually came from Levinas, but there's a philosopher of education called Garpesta who says that he presents a very useful distinction between learning from and being taught by. And learning from is where you are engaging transactionally into something that you want out of the other person. And being taught by means being open to being interpolated and transpassed by the other, and this idea of engaging in the dance. And it's interesting because when you're learning from, even learning from is the disposition we learn in formal and informal schooling within Western societies, right? So when you're learning from, you will also be bound by this seesaw of either something is great or something is not, right? So it's a +1 or -1. And in this case, there's also romanticization. So it's either romanticization or deficit theorization. Like somebody is either ahead of you or behind. It's very difficult, and in an uneven system, very difficult indeed to create the conditions for common ground, or for being both everybody on the ground. And we will try, and it's so interesting because I've been in this work for a long time with the Teia das Cinco Curas in Brazil, which is a network of Indigenous communities with connections with campesino communities as well. And the idea, when we've been bringing people with us who get associated with a research project, and the first impulse is to either want to teach or want to learn from, right? So it's the person can not only be a teacher or somebody who needs your help. And in placing the communities only as teachers, which is progressive and better than the charity-based savior complex thing, it does something to the communities that is also not fair, because if you idealize a community, you are also imposing a projection upon them and conditioning your motivation to that idealization. So what we see a lot is when people idealize, the moment that the complexities come up and the conflicts and contradictions and paradoxes come up, people then get disillusioned and that motivation goes away. And then the fragility sometimes kicks in, right? So sitting with your own complexity, understanding the other and the communities as complex, contradictory, as we all are, right? And recognizing the humanity, the good, the bad, the ugly, the broken, and the messed up of humanity everywhere, and being able to have an agreement of an inquiry that can sit with all of that will save you a lot of grief in the future. Because if you're basing your connection on idealizations or transactions of one kind or another, even the transaction of giving these people platform, giving these people voice, that plays out in the long run against the interests of the communities, apart from against the interest of depth relationships, of deep relationships. Sometimes it plays out in the interest of the communities because they might want that platform, right? They might, and that is, these are other layers of the complexity too, or they may want the resources. So for us, like in our project, in the beginning, we also wanted the communities to be here doing what I'm doing, right? And we tried a few times, and they turned to us and said, look, go do that and help us here with the support for the work that we have to do in the community. And then we created the loop reciprocity process where we would be generating income in the global north and passing it on for them to do the work they needed to do for themselves in the community, for supporting the defense of the Amazon, or pushing back on the Bolsonaro government, or buying cameras and drones for territorial protection. And then we would go there and say, okay, what should we be saying? How do we learn this? But when we hear things, the idea is to translate that into what lands here, not necessarily, sometimes it is about bringing them here as well, but it's not necessary. It's not what academia wants it to be in terms of extraction of content, right? That you go there and you bring here. It's a much more, it's a relationship of interpolation, basically. So Melanie.
Yeah. Thank you for the questions. And I see you have a couple questions there, Veronica. I personally, this is not my area. I don't have tons of connections in Latin America, so I'm not going to answer from that perspective. But the one thing I will say is just that, I'm not from this country originally also. And so I have been in Calgary for, 15 years or so. And this is where I'm learning about it, right? I was like totally clueless basically before, and have been really working on, well, what does it mean to create relationships on the land that I'm on? Right, with people who understand that land. And so I'm trying to work at it from that perspective. And I'm learning so much. In particular, Sandra Lamouche and Chantal Chagnon have given me so much. They've just shared so much with me in terms of their own knowledge about what it means to be connected to this land. And I think in my personal opinion, right, I've been also extremely shy about doing that, and like worried and like fixated on myself and all that kind of stuff of, oh, they're going to think terribly of me, because I'm a white settler immediately, and I can never make those relationships. But it takes work, and it takes openness and humility. And if you aren't willing to really engage with those things, it's basically impossible. So that those three pieces, I would say that they would go in any context, right? So humility and openness and, that willingness to learn and understanding the extreme limits of our own knowledge systems, those things, right? If you're willing to go in with that piece of it, I don't believe that, in my experience of travel, right, people don't reduce you to what your government is doing necessarily, or what the corporations from your country are doing. They won't automatically reduce you to that. And if you start a conversation in a good way, right? So yeah, starting the conversation and then figuring out where to go from there, and not assuming that it's going to have this impact or this, you know, impression, is, yeah, you kind of just have to jump in there a bit. That's my perspective, but I don't have anywhere close to the level of experience with this as Vanessa, so.
I love seeing all the hearts and claps as you both are speaking. Thank you both so much for your wisdom. We're almost at 1:30. Unfortunately, we can't take any more questions. I want to thank everyone for all their meaningful and impactful questions. I wish we had more time. Vanessa, before I kind of do the wrap up, is there any final thoughts you would like to share?
I just wanted to say that when Melanie was talking, what came to mind was a book called Cohort, Scarring Our Collective Soul Wound by Kesha Henneque. And in there, he describes the experience of bringing people to Kainai to witness a sun dance, and the pedagogy that was developed with the elders, with Keith and Karen Chief Moon. For the students, we're coming from UBC, so we crossed the Rockies to go during summers. They still go. We're not involved anymore with that, but with taking the students, but the students still go to witness a ceremony in the summer. And there were 4 things that students were asked to do. I can remember from the top of my head 3. One was believe with rather than believe in. The second one was practice reverence without idealization, which was what we were talking about. I think the other one is when you have a catharsis, do not put the story on it, right? Like allow the body to process whatever comes out through crying or screaming or whatever, or sometimes tremors, to go back to the land in the context of the ceremony. But I do recommend that book, and it's available online for free. So Scarring Our Collective Soul. Thank you. Thank you for opening the space. Thank you, Alanadon, for organizing this, and Ali for the tech support. Thank you, Melanie, for being such a wonderful interlocutor. And I hope to see you again. There's going to be another opportunity, right? So I'll pass it back to Alanadon.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much. It was really inspiring, and to hear you both share your wisdom and perspectives. I am just going to put in the chat the next session that we're so grateful to collaborate with Dr. Vanessa Andreotti on. It's happening next Friday, February 2nd at 12. It's going to be an opportunity to go into more in depth to the teachings and learnings that both Melanie and Vanessa shared with us today. Part of the goal is also to explore the possibility for UCalgary faculty and staff to create a course similar to Climate and the Nature Emergency Catalyst Program here at UCalgary. So if that excites you and interests you, please, I encourage you to register for that class. And there's still a few spots available, so we would love to see you there. I know we're just past time, so I will also share the PowerPoint and the recording, and I wish everyone a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.